So I feel like I hardly have to introduce the topic, really, because everyone is hyper aware of how important return on ad spend is. I mean, the value of the dollar you put in, you have to get that value back out. Otherwise, how do you optimize? How do you tweak? How do you double down on what's working? How do you pull back on what's not working? I mean, it's a very simple question, actually. Is what I'm doing working? But it's very difficult to answer that question. And so that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So I'd like to turn it over to you guys to introduce yourselves. And also, if you could, tell me what a day in the life is for a UA manager, at your company. And are they just being, crushed under the enormous weight of Excel, just like,
Yeah, I'll start. My name is Mike Schmid, Director of Marketing for Ember Entertainment. I mean, the average day is kind of different every single day. I can't really say an average day, but I will say that every single day I do log on to Multiverse, the world's best tool for understanding your return on ad spend. But I really honestly do use Multiverse every single day. It's been an awesome tool for me for checking ROAS if we're doing kind of big ad spend specifically, to share with my CEO and the rest of the team stuff from like the graphs inside of the tool, and it's been super, super helpful.
Cool.
So my name is Gina Kwong. I'm a senior user acquisition manager for Smule. We're a music apps company. We market 5 apps, but we have multiple that are older that was still really fun. One of which is T-Pain. But what the typical day for us really is come in to check, make sure that all of our spend budgets are on track. It's really top level down, and we all make sure that all of our regions are on track, everything, and we have all our different responsibilities. And then we have different projects that we work on, like working with the product team, data engineering team, making sure everything is in correctly. So it's like our due diligence, but it's different every day, and it's a lot of fun. We, like our Sing app brings in a lot of users that we have a lot of fun, like checking out their videos and things like that we were talking about before. So, yeah.
And I'm Beth Murphy. I'm at iHeartRadio. iHeartRadio is a music app that also features over 1,000 radio stations. We recently launched a subscription service as well called iHeartRadio All Access and iHeartRadio Plus, which is in competition with the Spotifys of the world. So we have both a free as well as a paid funnel from a marketing flow perspective. A typical day for the acquisition team and those challenges are really monitoring tests that you're doing, understanding which ones aren't doing well and killing them, starting new ones, and then trying to scale all your best sources. And really that involves constant data analysis, both through your platforms and tools, as well as pulling data from the BI team if you have to pull things together in different ways.
So what are the biggest frustrations, or what are the biggest headache-inducing things that happen in a day? And I think it probably has to do with all of the data wrangling and the various platforms and the constant testing and the pain of testing. So what are some of those the things that make you need to keep maybe a bottle of aspirin on your desk?
Yeah, it's all sorts of challenges. One of the biggest for me would be just kind of learning where to find new, better users, right? And like testing ad networks out, which can be a real challenge because it has a minimum spend required to do that. And non-transparent networks are really challenging because we can't really go into it with a good idea of what kind of traffic or inventory we're getting. So we've kind of switched how we go about even testing or doing any of that stuff by working with only transparent networks. Using Multiverse to kind of see publisher level info to see where kind of the best ROI is early on, and we can kind of cut off spend before we have to waste $20,000 on a test, which is nice. I mean, the data wrangling is a challenge for sure still, and a part of that is like marketers, I think, have to become better product managers and understanding further down the funnel, and product managers in turn also have to be better marketers and understanding where users are coming from, and working together and making sure that dynamic is really strong is a big challenge, especially at studios that have been around for a while that kind of have these kind of separation of church and state with product and marketing. But I see that getting less and less, and it's a challenge that tools are helping solve, for sure.
It's interesting, even internally, you have to break down, these communication silos. It's not even data silos.
Absolutely, yeah.
What about you guys?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is really making sure everything is in, and it's like you quality check it occasionally and making sure everything is properly, like you can trust the data, right? Which is part of what we do every day, but also like being able to communicate like internally with our teams, like letting them know what we need as we grow, with the different tools that we need. We were lucky enough to have like Tableau ready and having all the data in there, but you also have to make sure that partners are able to pass that kind of information for you, right? So that's part of it. And then also, we're a company that's growing very, very fast, and so finding reliable sources, like outside the normal channels nowadays is like also a big, maybe not a frustration necessarily, but it's a big challenge for all of us. Yeah, Smule?
I think we're finding, like, generally tools are getting better. They're getting easier and easier. So I would say that free time just goes to making the marketing task more complex. So you're doing more tests, you're doing more new sources. So that free time just kind of amplifies the work as some of your data problems get simplified, although I would say even if you have the best marketing stack in the world, you're still going to have different definitions of data sets, like what is a 30-day churn in Tune might not match what your BI team defined it when you set up Tableau. So there's still this big mismatch of data, even if you're on a really kind of tech debt-free platform. So I think those challenges are working with your BI team and also your product teams to make sure that you're prioritizing all those fixes, because all those marketing requests are really things that compete with everything else in the product roadmap. And so as a marketer, your challenge is to articulate what the business case is behind all those things that you need to get accomplished with extra product work. And so I would say a lot of that creates aspirin moments if you can't sort of articulate that in the right way and get it through quickly.
I want to know more about this tech debt-free platform.
I know.
Go on.
I've been in all the different places, and I think there's always tech debt, and so the marketer usually absorbs a lot of that tech debt, whether it's matching up pivot tables in Excel and doing these horrible things. But I've also been in better environments where you sort of made the investment, everything's really clean, and you're still, as a marketer, stuck doing pivot tables and matching Excel files. So I think that work there's no nirvana, but I think over my career, I think I've seen teams spend less time doing that grunt work and more times actually at a point where we're now scaling testing, where you can do hundreds to thousands of tests in a time frame where that used to be all you did in a year. So I think we're getting more sophisticated.
And I know you at Ember are using some of the free time you get back. It's a mental health thing, but also it's changed the way you do hiring, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. It definitely has. Like the tools are getting better. I don't want to say we need less analysts necessarily or anything like that, but you can focus kind of priorities, potentially on the buying side first before you bring in an analyst, or you can kind of add to other areas that might need some beefing up because the tools are so good. That is kind of an interesting shift that I've seen in my 6 years in the mobile games industry, whereas we no longer necessarily need 20, at least a size team like Ember doesn't need a 15-person BI team anymore. We have tools that can do a lot of heavy lifting for us, which has been really great.
Oh, Beth, you brought up, and I think this is a continuing problem, just nomenclature and like definitions that are different between platforms. So it's not just a matter of bringing it all together in one place. It's once you do, it's like how do you make it make sense? And so how big of a problem is that still, and is that getting better?
I would say I haven't seen it getting better. And it's still interesting as an industry. For example, we were trying to define what 30-day churn was, and that could be day 31, that could be day 60, and I think there's still a lot of things. So you might tune out of the box define it in a certain way, and then your BI team might decide to define it another way based on your business, and so kind of you have this collective history of people defining different KPIs in different ways. Or there's some reason that this system looks at this thing in the data warehouse and this other piece of data looks at it in a different way. An example with really highly downloaded apps is that you actually get a lot of returning users that are counted as installs, but they're not really installs, right? You just re-engage the user, they open the app. And so you could have a vendor telling you that is an install. And so once you look at your kind of daily downloads, they could be up to 30% off. And so I think then you come up with all these kind of interesting ways to gross numbers up and match them and swag them. And I think that's where the devil becomes the details and getting that right and really working with your product and development teams and BI teams to get that work right really pays off.
Yeah, I'm going to quote Peter Hamilton, we need to come together. But even more importantly than fraud, we need to come together on nomenclature and make sure that's standardized, because it drives me out of my mind to go to a new studio or to kind of talk to people in other studios. And it happened to us recently. We did a soft launch, and I came out with our day one retention's 38%, and somebody was like, oh, I saw 42%. I'm like, what? Where are you seeing that? And you go and you look at all these tools, are calculating it slightly different ways, and you're like, this is maddening. Can we just standardize this across the board? Because if we even do it internally, it's that's great, but what metric are we measuring against? What's an industry standard measured by? We really need to figure out a way to standardize that. It's been way too long.
Yeah, we see that at Smule as well, where we do, when you're working with different partners, right? Sometimes what they see is very different from what you do, and you have to figure out these discrepancies. I think one of the frustrating things is sometimes it's just really the time zone for me. Yeah. It's okay, that could explain exactly where the discrepancy comes from. I think that we are trying to internally kind of reconcile that as well, how we see day 1, day 30, and as different types of campaigns that we run, retargeting, you have to figure out how would you reattribute these users, right? Things like that. So I think there's a lot of work that can be done, and definitely voting +1 for the normalizing for the industry.
Yeah, that's 2. What else we got?
I'll throw
Just to be clear, I was joking about it being more important than fraud. I know fraud is a super touchy issue. I'm not gonna...
Actually, let's talk about fraud, because I was going to bring it up a little bit later, but you can't really do a proper calculation of your return on ad spend if there's just garbage and junk floating around in there. So how are you guys rooting out fraud? How are you thinking about quality traffic, and how are you thinking about all of those things with fraud in mind in particular?
Yeah, I think I use Tune's fraud detection tool.
Oh my God.
No, I really do use it, but fraud is definitely, and I want to hear from these guys because it'll be interesting. They definitely operate at a different scale than we do at Ember. We only use transparent networks, and we don't necessarily do a ton of UA at all times. We kind of work in waves, but working with transparent networks allows us to kind of see the publisher and understand quickly if it's a real user or not.
For us, we do work with networks that do give the names, which we prefer, but we do have networks that are hashed, and I think that we do rely on the tracking partner that we work with, and for them to dedupe installs and whatnot. But we also have internal systems where we do make sure that verifies IP if things don't look it's legit. We do have systems in place that they can help us with that. We've had some issues before, and it's definitely a big issue for all of us, and I don't know if anybody's really figured it out. There are different features out there that we're testing, but with mobile, I think the more sources you use, right, the more you'll see this. And I think we'll see how the industry goes with this.
And I would say, I think as a marketer, the more focused you are on down funnel KPIs, the less of it is an issue, because you're looking at cost per registration, cost per subscription, cost per day 60 or day 90, however you define that user. And so the more you're doing that, the more you're vetting sources for downstream quality anyways, and I think it's less of an issue than if you're upstream just doing clicks, web clicks versus installs. But the tools are getting better, and I think the ecosystem's getting better too, so we'll write into an IO if anything is fraudulent and we flag it, we don't pay for it, right? And I think that's becoming standard industry practice. So I think it's actually becoming easier to flag fraud than it has been in the past.
And what about optimization? Is that getting easier, better to do because of the tools that are out there, as opposed to what it was even maybe like a year ago, in terms of the data that you have access to and how you're able to bring it together?
You can go. We have a fairly lean team, so when we do optimizations, we try not to overdo them. And so being able to match up all the data and be able to see it by region, by app is very important to us. And we are working on being able to really optimize Pipe Hub, right? And to be able to understand that if I'm buying this publisher through this network and this network as well, to be able to compare is super important to us. So that's some of the things that we're really working on. And we do, as UA marketers, even though we kind of are the initial gatekeepers in the beginning to bring the users in, we do look at performance down the funnel, right? To make sure that even if this user is really cheap, it might not be the best ROI. So there are some challenges that we see with some of our partners, which are not as transparent. But I think that as an industry, we are moving towards more transparent because they understand that we value that, but we won't cut them out, which is, I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, we leverage networks, managed networks that really help us optimize as well. And then internally, we really focus on creative optimization. And trying just a bunch of different stuff, especially in soft launch, and kind of get an idea of what drives the most, not the most installs, but the highest quality installs, right? Because we can put, and you see ads that aren't representative of the games out there or the apps out there, and that's great. That whatever network ran that got the credit for that, but that didn't help the developer find a quality user. So we focus on things that are indicative of the game or the experience that we're promoting, and we track it down funnel to make sure that this creative is actually going to be optimized for finding better users by the time we go live.
And I think the technology is getting better, so there's more sophisticated data levers, and whether you're using your own DMP lever or another partner's layer of data, I think it's easier and easier to optimize. I think the challenge is really just once you find a great source, how can you scale it? And that's usually the marketer's dilemma, is you can't find enough. You want more and you can't, so you have to find more sources of it. And so that becomes the eternal testing challenge.
What would be a few, hacks or tips or tricks, to, because things, are getting better, but they're, still wonky, So what, for the audience, some things that you do, to get at return on ad spend that you think would be, useful to your colleagues out there in the audience?
Yeah, it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that ASO is important. And I've been at studios where there's been no focus on it, and they've spent tons and tons of money on UA, and didn't realize that there's this piece of the funnel that optimization is super, super important and valuable. I don't know if it's necessarily a hack, but because I've seen that there are studios that don't do that, it's definitely something that should at least be out there, and people should definitely be aware that you can really get crazy amounts of return on optimizing your storefront.
Mm-hmm.
For us, I think, I don't know if there's any really big tricks out there, but for us is we optimize fairly quickly if something is not correct or if it's not working. I think that we are trained to question if something's really good, why is it really good, and then something bad, and why is it really bad, right? And I think that for us, that's where we've seen some really good opportunities. Sometimes where understanding like if there's like a spike in organic, why is that? Why is that happening? Like with the App Store, which we've found a few times. Trying to understand, like reach out to those users, like why is that? Why are they using our app? Things like that. So I think for us, that's worked really well.
And my tip is, I think mobile still, like the places where you get the biggest return on investment are these pockets of market inefficiency, and so you're always trying to find those sources. And so as a general rule, I always allocate like X% of a budget to just testing that aren't current avenues, whether that's new native platforms or just other avenues, because once you find those, you'll get like really scalable ROI versus incremental ROI. So I always try to allocate at least 15% of a budget to testing.
Okay.
Can I change my answer? I have a better answer.
Yes.
Okay. I recently reached out to our top like 100 spenders in the game, and it was kind of in my head. I'm like, I want to understand the user better, understand what the user base looks like, and I learned some crazy stuff. But I think like for a marketer, understanding the community and understanding the user is super duper important. I think undervalued, especially in performance advertising. Knowing who your customer is and how to reach them can come from just like one-on-one communication to multiple people, and kind of understanding what motivates them in the game too is super important, or the app. But
Yeah, it could look more like a brand sensibility to bring to performance marketing.
Yep.
Yeah. And how different are the various ad partners that you work with really? And I'm asking also as not a practitioner because I have an inbox full of pitches about the new offering, the new solution, the new this, the new that, and it's hard for me to know how different they are and how valuable they are. And you guys are actually in there, messing around with them, testing them, which can sometimes be painful, like you mentioned backstage. But how different are these players really? There's the challenge of bringing them together, but how different are they, even though the nomenclature is different, or how they might process something is a little bit different, but like really when you get into the guts of it.
yeah, I mean, working with only transparent networks, we see how similar they can be. It's interesting that even that being the case, we're seeing big differences in the type of user we're getting from the same one app that's running with different networks and mediation, but. I would say like there's a lot of similarities, but there's some pretty big differences between kind of the top performing ad networks and the long tail of people that send you emails asking to confirm that you've not been abducted by aliens and all this other crap that try to get your attention. And that is that for me is like immediately like, oh, this is a good way to put that ad network in this bucket over here. But most of the top obviously are running a lot of the same inventory, but I think it's still important to test different people different networks because we've seen dramatically different performance from the same publishers on different networks.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe at different times too.
Yep.
Yeah.
And different creatives that they might optimize differently.
Yep. I mean, just to add to that, I think when you see the same publisher in different networks, it could just be because you're on like different level of the waterfall, right? And so we see that sometimes from the networks that do have transparency, and then like you said, it's just really testing, because for different apps it could work, it could not work for another network with the same exact publisher for your apps. So because we have so many apps that we do have the opportunity to test all of them, it takes a lot of work. So we try to test really fast, and if it doesn't work, we cut it. And the level of granularity that we get from each network sometimes can be very different, and also the success of the campaign can really depend on the type of buy that you buy from them, like whether it's CPI, CPA, customer engagement. Sometimes we do retargeting, so it all depends on how they work for your app itself.
Yeah, and I would just sort of add, there is this whole ecosystem, and I do think there's sort of it's not terribly different if the inventory is the same. So whenever I think about like what are the cool things to test, it's like totally different, distinct sets of inventory and channels, whether it's an influencer, campaign, or it's a native ad campaign and it's only with certain publishers. So I always really think about, because after a while and you get mature, you're going to optimize sort of this other ecosystem. It's sort of these new kind of different evolving ad mediums where I think is where you find the most interesting results.
And do you guys feel like you are getting return on ad spend, like when you pour money into the ecosystem? I mean, obviously users come, but do you feel like you're getting value for money out there?
Not during Christmas.
No.
Yes, we do. I mean, I think that's why with all these spreadsheets, we do have analysts that help us calculate exactly when we break even, and trying to figure out exactly what the goals are, things like that. So we have targets that we run, and I think what's really interesting is to try and see if we can do better, right? Like, you already know what your goals are. You most of the time will know what the performance should be like. Testing these new channels and new pubs, and seeing a really minuscule pub kind of rise to the top is actually really exciting for us. So whether we know exactly which one they are or not. So.
And I think if your question is what do you do in-house versus what do you outsource? I mean, I think that's always an interesting question. It's sort of what's your core competency as you scale. And to me, there's certain things that you should be really good at, and then there's certain things that you're always going to test. And so there's always going to be a world where you're going to want to test things that you don't necessarily do yourself. And I think that there's always inherent value in that. From a marketer perspective, because you could do everything yourself, but you won't necessarily be able to do everything as quickly. So I do think that there is a value in using external partners that charge you fees to do things when it's in the right area that it's not your core competency.
Right, you can't bring everything in-house, and you wouldn't necessarily want to for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
And then we just have about a minute left. So to round it out, say compared to a couple of years ago, do you feel like things are in aggregate better? And what is something that you can do now to really get at ROAS or ROAS? There was a debate backstage as to how to pronounce it that you couldn't do before.
And just to confirm, it's Schiff.
Yes,
Schiff. Sorry, real quick, what was the question?
You just wanted to tell your gift joke.
How did my brain?
2 years ago to today, yeah.
We're definitely smarter, for sure, but it's actually a lot harder in a lot of ways, right? There was way less noise on the storefronts, and the inventory was a lot less expensive, a lot more affordable, I should say. And we had quicker turnaround time for return on ad spend. Now we just have to either get more comfortable with a longer turnaround time for that return on ad spend, or smarter about the types of users we acquire, or we acquire less users that we're more comfortable understanding our return more quickly. So I would say it's harder, but we're a lot better at it.
Do you guys have anything else to bring us home?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, it's 2-3 years ago, it would take me half a day just to piece together everything. And it's mainly because of Excel being super slow on Mac. But it's, we definitely know more now. We can do analysis much faster, understanding where we're spending the money as much as possible. But I think, there's a lot more competition on mobile. It's much more expensive. CPMs are going up month over month. Trying to find that next big channel, I think it's everybody's big goal, right? Trying to get that new pub that works for your app. I think that's what we're always striving for.
I would just add that I think it's a lot better in terms of tools. I think now a marketer can look at what is an LTV by a specific source and come up with a hurdle for every specific thing they're doing, which I think you could have done 2 years ago, but you would probably need 3 times as many people to do it. So I think that's been really empowering I do think that, yeah, mobile itself is becoming more competitive. I would say, though, that's really been the last 5 years, like versus like the early days of when it was truly Wild West. So I feel like we're kind of in this era of expensive. It's really markets are becoming more efficient, and so it's harder to find these little pockets of great differentiated ways to acquire users. But I think the good news is as a marketer, it's getting easier and easier to become more sophisticated about really optimizing your spend.
Well, thank you very much. I think the takeaway is that things are getting better, but everyone still hates Excel. So that's it. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Oh,